Hey guys, in this video I'm going to show you how to make this animated currency UI for your Fortnite maps. Okay, so in a fresh UEFN project, the first thing you're probably going to want to do is import some of these textures that I provided for you in the Patreon link that you'll find in the description below. So those will just be the money icon as well as the stat frame icon. That's pretty well all you're going to need as far as assets go, as well as the code, which you can also find in the Patreon, but we'll get that later once we actually set up the script you'll need. So the first thing you're probably going to do is create a folder where you're going to store your widget. I would suggest a name like widgets, pretty intuitive. Just going to store your widgets. So you can go ahead and create that, open it up, and then you'll want to create a user interface widget blueprint. So you can just go right click in your content drawer, go to user interface, widget blueprint, and select user widget. And you can name it something that you're going to remember. In the case of the code, that is going to be called a currency display. So we're going to call that w_currency display. And just go ahead and create that. And then you can open that up. Once that opens, you're going to immediately see a kind of class setting menu. You can just go ahead and close that. And the first thing we want to do is throw out a canvas panel onto your display here. So this is what's going to hold your UI elements. Then you're going to need an overlay. Just throw that anywhere for now and set it to size to content. Then what you're going to want to do is drag an image into your overlay. You can do that in your hierarchy here, just so it's actually inside. Put it in there, open up your content drawer, go back to wherever you placed your textures. So mine is just in the root. And you can drag out your stat frame icon into the brush image. And it'll be a little big, so I would say cut it in half. Maybe do 190 by 64. It's a pretty good size. Then within that overlay, you're going to throw a stack box, which is actually going to hold the cache icon as well as the text that we're going to later animate. So first thing you want to put in the stack box is another image. And again, open up your content drawer. You can drag out the money icon this time. It will be way too big. I would say a size like 80 by maybe 60. Okay, maybe not. It's still a little too big. Let's do 60 by 40. That's a pretty good size. Set that to be center, and then set the stack box to be fill, and give it some padding of, I'd say around 10, just to keep it away from the edges. Next, you're going to want to put a text box in the stack box, so you can do that by just dragging in the hierarchy once again. Once it's there, you don't really have to change too many settings on this. I would say set the horizontal alignment to right, so it sticks to the right side, and then fill. And then set the vertical alignment to center. Another thing you're probably going to want to do is maybe adjust some of the font settings. I would say, since we have a white on white, changing the outline so that it is visible, maybe around 2 or 3. It's a good thick outline. Don't have to worry too much about the text right now. We can change that just so we can see how it's going to look. Let's align our overlay to a more reasonable position on the canvas. So you go ahead and select your overlay, go to anchors. You can just click the drop down. It'll show this menu. Hold Control Shift and then click on the left one. It'll align it to the left side of the screen. And give it a little bit of position with X so it's not touching the walls here. Okay, now we can get to the verse variables. So to do that, if you don't have the menu up by default, which you may not, you can go ahead and go Window, click on Variables. It'll open this menu that will just be verse variables. The first one you want to create is you can just go ahead and click Add, and then name it whatever you'd like. This one's going to be controlling the text content, so we're just going to call it that exactly. And then you're going to want to change this to be a message type. That way you can send messages through Verse, and they will change your text. I'm not too sure about any of these settings yet. I haven't worked with this all that much, but I'm sure the defaults are fine. Go ahead and just hit the check mark to add that. Next, we're going to need 2 more variables, one for playing the positive animation and one for playing the negative animation, just when the currency changes. So the first one we'll do is the positive, so you can name it something like play pause anim, set it to be a float type, the check mark. Again, one more. Name it something for the negative one. So we're going to just say play negative animation. Change that to float, the check mark. And those are the 3 verse variables that we're going to need to expose for this. So you can go ahead and close that. You're not going to need that anymore. The next thing you want to do is open up your animation tab here. and you're going to want to dock it in your layout. Okay, so once you have your animation tab open, you're going to go ahead and click on the plus animation, name it something intuitive, so positive animation, click on it, click on your text block because that's what we're going to be animating, and go to plus on the add and add your text block as a track for your animation. The first thing we'll do is click on the plus track here on your text block track and add a transform track. So you can zoom in by holding control and scrolling so you can see your keyframes a little better. Since this is going to be a very short animation, you'll probably want to zoom in to the kind of millisecond level. So start by setting a keyframe when your scrubber is at 0 on your transform. So you'll have an initial position to go off of. This animation is pretty short, so we'll end it at 0.2 seconds. So put your scrubber to that, and then click your keyframe as well there. So it'll start and end at its default position. Then what you want to do is set your scrubber to the 0.1 second mark, so exactly halfway through. Scroll down in your text block definition here to find your render transform. And then pick some scale and angle that you like for this animation. I think 1.3 for the scale is pretty good, as well as -6 on the rotation. So once you do that, just keyframe the entire transform for that position, and you can see when you scrub through that it will play forwards and backwards as the animation plays. Next, we'll deal with the color. So set your scrubber back to 0, scroll back up in your text block, set a color and opacity keyframe at 0 here. So it'll start at fully white. Set your scrubber to the 0.2, the end of the animation, and then set another keyframe just so it will start and end at white. Then set your animation scrubber to around maybe a quarter through, and change your color to a green of your liking, and then keyframe that. Duplicate, so you can click on your previous keyframe, do Control D, it'll duplicate it, and then just drag that keyframe to maybe 3/4 through. So now you have this bumping green animation that will play for you. And that's about it for the positive animation. So next for the negative animation, what we're going to do is first reset our text block to be default, since we changed some of those to make the animation. So just so we have a clean slate, not that they're actually going to affect the previous animation we made. So you can do that by just going into your text block settings here and just clicking these arrows where they appear for things you want to change back. So changing it back to white, and then you can see the transform still a little off. So we're going to scroll down to that, reset the scale, and reset the angle, just so they're fresh for us. Then we can go ahead and go plus animation, name it something intuitive. So this is going to be when you lose money. So negative animation, create that, and then select it. Again, just like the positive animation, we're going to go ahead and add a text block track so we can animate our text block. So have it with it selected, go to plus. We're going to add another transform track because we want to move it. Again, you can scroll in so you can see your frames a little better. Then you want to scroll your scrubber to the 0.2, which is going to be the end of our animation, and add a second keyframe there so it starts and ends the same just as before. So for this one, what we're going to want to do is, again, scroll down to your render transform. This one, we're actually just going to move it. So I think something like 15 pixels down is a good amount. So you can do that just by going to your translation and setting the Y value to 15, and then making sure you set a keyframe there so it will animate back and forth as your animation plays. You can see that just by hitting play after you've changed that value and keyframed it. That nice little bump. Then what we're going to want to do is the same thing for the color that we did last time. So scroll up to the color and opacity, set a keyframe at 0, scroll your scrubber to 0.2 seconds, the end of the animation, set a second keyframe so we have it starting and ending at white, just as you would like. Then set your scrubber to around a quarter of the way through. Change your color to be a red of your liking. Keyframe that color. Select the keyframe. You can do that in your timeline, and then just do Control D to duplicate it. Then drag that second keyframe to 3/4 way through your animation. So now you have this red kind of bumping animation that we will use when you lose money. Go ahead and save all that, compile. Okay, now that our animations are all set up, we're going to want to bind these all to our verse variable so we can control it through our code. So we can start off by selecting our text block and going to this text content here and clicking this new icon that's appeared after this update. So this is going to bind our text content, so it should just automatically appear. And you can just go ahead and click on that and click select, and that's all done. So now in our code, we can just use that field and change it to whatever value we would like. For the playing of the animations, what we're going to have to do is in our text block with the View Bindings tab open. If it's not open already, you can go down to View Bindings here. I would say dock it in your layout just so it stays there and doesn't leave you if you misclick something. So with your text block selected, you're going to go ahead and add a condition. In your field of that condition that gets added, you're going to go ahead and select it and then select your blueprint. And then you're going to find your animation variables that you created. So you can see play pause anim and play negative animation. Those two will appear. You go ahead, let's start with the positive one. So just go ahead and select that, select. And then the condition will be when it is equal to 1. We're going to then go here and go Q play animation, select that. So now whenever we set the value of play positive animation in our verse code to be 1, it's going to fire off this Q play animation. So what we're going to then want to do is click on this bind here in the animation, and we're going to find our animation that we made, so positive animation, and just select that. The rest of the settings are fine as default. You can just leave those as is. With that first one done, you can just go ahead and click the little drop down to hide it, and then we're going to add a second condition here. So it's exactly the same as the one we just did, but using the negative animation. So just go ahead and select field, click on your blueprint, and then go play negative animation, again, is equal to 1. So whenever we set that field inverse to 1, it will play this animation. So again, field, blueprint, Q play animation, select, and then click on the binding, select your animation from the list here. It should just be called negative animation or whatever you called it. Go ahead and select that. And that is all done there. Go ahead and save all this and compile. And that's it for the blueprint side of things. And we're going to go over and bring in the code that we're going to use for this system. Okay, so back in UEFN, we're going to now bring in our verse code. So you can do that by just clicking on this new Open Project in VS Code button that you've added, and that'll open VS Code. I've already got it added here, but what you pretty much want to do is just go on this plus icon, make a file, you can name it whatever you want, make sure it's .verse extension. Then in that empty file that you create, you're just going to paste all of the code that is provided for you in the Patreon. We'll do a quick run through of just what's happening, but it's not too advanced. If you need any help, of course, leave a comment or shoot me a message on Twitter, and I will help you in whatever ways I can. So basically what we have is some utility functions to start. So one that converts your strings into messages that are going to be displayed in the currency text block. Then we have this horrible map of, or I guess, array of postfixes or suffixes that we're going to be using. So that's going to be just the letters that are going to display after your numbers. So like the K, the B, the T for like thousands, billions, trillions, and so on. Then we have this utility function that converts a float number into a string where it kind of truncates it, cuts it down to be 3 characters, and then the suffix at most. So you'll get like that 1.23K kind of look that we had in the example. Got another utility function that just removes the key from a map. That's just used for cleaning up the map when players leave. Of course, if you run into any errors with these saying like ambiguous identifiers, if you have your own definitions for these functions, of course, use whatever you already have. Then we have a currency payload class. This is just used for passing data around in the events that we're using. Then we have our actual HUD that is going to be saved per player. So we're going to store the player's reference as well as references to the events that we're going to be using to pass data around. So that'll just be events like when somebody leaves, when somebody's currency changes. Then we'll have our widget definition. So if you have an error here, it could be because of where you've placed or what you've named your widget. So in my case, I have a folder called widgets, and then I named my widget W_currency display. So if you've named it something different or put it somewhere else, this is where you're probably going to have to change that. And then we have our animation duration. This is just 0.2 seconds, which is what we made the duration of our animation, or both of them. So if you happen to change it or make it something different, make sure you reflect that in your code. And then we have a variable currency float just to store how much money we have. So this is not going to be a persistent system. It could be very easily changed to be so. So we have this handling function that will just pretty much catch any of these currency change events, make sure it is for you, and then it will update your UI accordingly and play the animations. It will also then check whenever somebody leaves. If that player leaves, it will make sure to stop looking for your change animations, just so we're not wasting a small bit of a performance on checking your events. Then we have this update currency function, which pretty much just takes in the change in currency that you're sending it and updates the UI, and then checks if it's positive or negative and plays the respective animations. So this is another area for potential errors. So if you didn't name your verse variables play pause animation or play neg animation, that will be reflected here. You'll get some errors, and you'll have to just make sure these are named according to what you named your verse variables. Likewise for the text content variable here. Then we have a pretty simple add to player function. It will just spawn the handler, so it'll watch for changes, and then it will add the UI to the player screen and making sure that it's not consuming any inputs. Then we have the actual verse device that you're going to be placing down in the world. We'll do that in a minute here. It just has some references to player spawners, so it'll make sure whenever somebody spawns, the UI gets added to their screen, and it'll start watching for the events to make sure it's updating your UI accordingly. Then we have some testing buttons. You're probably going to want to change these to be whatever is adding or removing your currency. So you can usually do that through this currency event, which is probably the best way to do it. The buttons are just there for testing purposes and as an example of how to use this event. So of course then we have this event. It's using the currency payload class that was mentioned earlier that stores information about the player that is having their currency changed, as well as how much currency is being changed. So every time this event gets called, the UI classes will be watching for that change, and they will update accordingly if it is for the player that's watching for it. Then we have a map just to store these classes. It's not really needed in the sense that we don't actually need to store these. They're not too useful after we've created them because they manage themselves. It's really just there so that we don't accidentally add it to the player twice when they respawn. You'll see that in a second. Then in our onBegin, we're just subscribing to events, players leaving, players spawning, our testing buttons. The testing button function's pretty self-explanatory. All they do is convert the player to an agent, or the agent to a player to make sure they're a player, and then it will send the signal to the event that the player's currency has changed with a positive 100 or negative 100, respective of the button clicked. Then we have a simple onPlayer removed function that just cleans out their data and cancels their handler, just so it's not watching for their events when they leave. Then we have our onSpawn function, which will start by just converting the agent to a player, checking if they already have a UI or not. If they don't, create one, set it in the map, and then add it to them. So that's pretty much it for the code. You can go ahead and just close that once you've got that there. And then go verse, compile verse code. And then you should find in your content drawer that a HUD manager device has appeared. So you can just go ahead and drag that out into the world. And it's got a few fields that we're going to need to attach. So you can just go ahead and add 2 player spawners, or however many you have, and make sure they're attached to your player spawn pads. And then we're going to need to add some buttons for these testing things. So you can just go into your content drawer through Fortnite, devices, search up button, place one down. Some interaction text, you'll remember what it does, plus 100. Hold Alt and drag it to duplicate it. Then you can name that, make sure to change that one to minus 100. And then using the dropper, you can just select these in your device. And that is it. So now we're going to launch a session and see how all of this looks. All right, with a session loaded, we can go ahead and start up our game and take a look at this UI here, make sure it's working. So immediately we see our 0, which is expected, then hitting the plus 100 button, 100 to our currency, play the animation. And looks pretty good. And then for our negative, it plays the other animation as we'd expect. And yeah, so that's pretty much it for that system. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know what you guys want to see next. Leave comments, anything you guys want to see, interesting systems or UI mechanics. Always looking for more things to make content on.